Thank you, Sanika, for that brilliant talk. And now I would like the panel to go a little bit more into the practicalities of social banking, and us to talk a little bit about what unifies this movement before we move into the tradition of savings banks in Norway, and then the last, the barriers and the potential future prospects for this social banking movement. So first, Christopher. Ekobanken is an ethical bank that sees money as a social medium, but what would you say that means for the daily practice of banking, and how do you balance the social, environmental, and economic objectives?
Doing sustainable banking is really working with the concrete and real clients. As Sanika mentioned, we are working in the real economy, and that means that we are actually meeting people that want to do a change in society. And I see a bank just as a co-worker in their company, helping them with advice and with, in some cases, finance to foster their ideas, and in some cases even to say no, of course, because all ideas aren't that good. But money and sustainable banks is really for the initiatives, and we are not running it to just make the bank in itself grow and be bigger. We want our clients to be bigger, and that's our main aim. And as was mentioned before, that really lies in the heart of the business model, to work with the triple bottom line approach, taking people, planet, and prosperity into account. And we do that with every client that we work with, to see how is their activities, is it within the planetary framework, and is it on a human ground, and does it make a profit? Because all the activities need to make a profit in order to pay the loan back to the bank, because what we give out as loan needs to be paid back. And in the same time, we look at ourselves in the same way. So we as an institution need to work with people, planet, and prosperity at the heart of our business model. It's not just something that we tell our clients to do. We need to do it ourselves and walk the talk.
And then to Kjell Fredrik from Cultura, which was launched in 1997 with the purpose of using money as a tool to create social justice and a better environment. How would you say that the bank's practice has evolved over the past 20 years? And do you experience a change or a growing demand of your services?
Well, I've only been with the bank for, well, it's 10 years now. So half the time it's been a bank. It was cooperative before that, the change over those years. We, as Christopher said, we're also working on the basis of the 3 Ps: the people, planet, and prosperity. And in that order, I think the order of the words are important here. It's first people and planet, and then prosperity. It used to be people, planet, and profit, I think, but they changed the profit for prosperity. But I don't know if that changed the realities very much. So yes, we also want to have to cope with the problems, to have a cooperation with our clients. And as Christopher also said, it's they should prosper because they have the good ideas of how to make a good change in society. That's the core of their business. And the core of the business is not to make a profit, but to achieve something which is good for society, for people and planet. But to do that, if you hold on to that core value, it's and you want to do that while you're actually running a bank, which is a business and which has to make a profit, just like your clients. You have to work a lot with the problem of making a profit as well. So I often say it like that. It's like the week. It's 6 working days and one holiday, and it's the holy day. Then I'm thinking about. We have to return to that every 7th day, so to speak, and remind ourselves why we're doing this. Because those other 6 days aren't that much different, I would say. I don't know if the other ones or Christopher agrees with me in that. It's not all that much different from running another kind of bank. We're concerned about our clients if they are making a profit so they can pay their loans back, if their businesses are doing well. And so on, and the same for our own business. We're concerned about that, and we have to take care of that every day. But we have to remember why we are doing this, and we're trying to do this by running a business, and that's the difference between other organizations which are doing good in society, like well, you can mention. The UNICEF, the Red Cross, whoever, all those organizations, the environmental organizations, the Friend of the Earth, the WWF, they don't run businesses, but they're doing it another way. They collect money and they use it for good purposes. But we are integrating, helping society to be better when it comes to the standard of the social standard and the environmental standard of society. We're integrated that into our banking business, and it should be integrated into our clients' businesses as well. So, and we're it's been like that for 10 years. For the 10 years I've been in the bank, and so maybe not that much of development, but we're tiny, small, and we're learning things every day and every week and every year how to do this in a better and more efficient way.
Thank you. Then I'd like to turn to Sanika for a little comment on that, because the social banking now sounds like a big win-win for people, planet, and society, and everyone. But certainly there must be some barriers, as the savings banks are still in minority and fairly small, although still growing. What, in your opinion or experience, are the main challenges or costs to running a social bank?
Oh, that's probably more a question for the practitioners, I would guess.
I would also ask them to comment, but as you have sort of an overview.
I mean, of course, if you're if you're working in a sustainable way, and you don't focus on profit maximization, then you would easily think that it's more costly to run such an organization. But as I have shown those graphics, I mean, they pretty much show that in terms of the return on assets and the return on equity, it's even in a way more efficient to run a sustainable organization. Yeah.
And then the practitioners might comment briefly. Both are there costs to the practice that you do, and are there sort of limits to the size and the scale that you can work the social banking? Christopher first.
Of course, I could make a long talk about all the difficulties of running a small bank, but that would be another evening, I think. But I think one important hurdle is, of course, regulation. It's the same for every bank, but it's very precure to us, and it has to do that we think that we have not caused all the damages on the financial market, but we still have the same regulation. And of course, that is very tough. We want to be front runners, but not front runners in creating new sustainable products. Of course we have sustainable products, but we want to, in our culture and in our heart, in every day, have sustainability at the heart of what we're doing. Whereas we can see that the major banks, they are now creating sustainable products, but they are not changing the culture. And that is a huge difference. It's no problem for anybody to create a green bond or a green product or a green loan or something when everything else is just the normal kind of stuff. And I think that is really the heart of what we are doing. We are trying to change the whole financial system. And that is, of course, very costly and takes a lot of time, because we need to work on our own culture and how we want to be part of the transition movement in society. So in culture, and of course infrastructure is important and is very expensive for us as small banks to come in to the infrastructure, which is usually owned by the larger banks, or is some sunk old costs, and the barriers of entry is really high if you come into the system later. And I think another part of a hurdle is the research that we do, is that we need to look into our clients in other ways than the major banks do, because we actually look for the cultural, ecological and social added values, or the extras. So we really look into them, and that takes a lot of time. We need, as Sanika mentioned, to build on our relationship with the clients. I've been with Ekobanken for many years, and then you know when the client comes back, if they have done a good job or not, and you follow up on them. And of course that takes a lot of time.
One comment.
Quickly.
Yeah. I mean, what we see, or the challenges we see in all our member institutions are the three: digitalization, regulations, as you mentioned, one size that does not fit all, and of course low interest margin. And I think especially the low interest margin, as you are focusing on the core banking business and on loans. This is, especially for the social banks, a big problem, because you don't have so many other, or you don't have a portfolio of other services and products. So this is a problem for especially social banks that focus on the core banking business. And concerning digitalization, I mean, I mentioned it. There are some financial service providers, fintech or tech-based financial service providers that are a bit smoother, a bit cooler maybe, and maybe also fit better to the younger generation. And I think that will be a big challenge in the future. For example, in Germany there is a young startup, and it's called Tomorrow, and they now start similar things as GLS Bank. They are not a bank, but they do the same services, and they collaborate with a banking platform. Yeah, so I think there are a lot of challenges, and I mean, we do have a conversation about how to bring or how to digitalize some of the services inside our member institutions. But the answer I always get back is we focus on human relationships. And if you digitalize everything, then there will not be human relationships anymore. And that's probably true to a certain extent, but still, I think there's there will be a lot of discussions about that topic. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Should I comment on it as well?
Do you have something to add?
It's a big question. It's often asked, and I think it's important. Is there a conflict between making a profit and doing a sustainable kind of business, a sustainable banking business? And of course, there shouldn't be a conflict between those. But the truth is, in my opinion, that there is a conflict today. The world is not like it should be. So that's how we hope it will be in the future, that there won't be any conflict between sustainability and profits anymore. When sustainability is prerequisite to making a business, running a business. But today we have to accept that there is a conflict, and it means if you want to run a sustainable banking business or any other kind of sustainable business, there is a need for some kind of moderation. If your question number one is how am I gonna make as much profit as possible within a certain time frame, then you're not starting with the right question. You're trying to make a profit should be how to do that should be question number 2 or 3. And question number 1 should be how can I contribute to a better standard in society, a social standard and environmental standard, and that requires today a moderation when it comes to the question of profit. So, but in my mind, that's exactly what we're trying to change. It's one of the basic things we're trying to change. Things like that have been changed before. I'm thinking about when they abandoned slavery from part of business. It was a very, very important business in Europe. Was based on slavery, the sugar industry, and it was. They couldn't think of how they could run that business without slaves. And some people started, and it was late 1700s. Some people started to ask the questions: why we can't do this because it's immoral. You can't own another person. And through the years, they had a breakthrough, and then they are running our business. And today we're thinking about, of course, not using slaves is not something which prevents you from making a profit. How could you think something like that? So that's the kind of development we're actually talking about, and especially when it comes to the environmental challenges the world is facing today. We have to realize that we can't go on like that, doing those. We can't drill for all that oil, and we can't burn it because it just has to stop. And then when we realize that, we will find ways to do our business. We will make profits, I'm sure. But today, unfortunately, still the oil industry is too profitable and too important for Norway, as one example. So that's the kind of change we're trying to do, trying to contribute to.
Thank you. So now I'd like to invite Morten Søberg to join this conversation. You work for Sparebanken 1. You also have quite some experience and insight into the Norwegian savings bank banking sector or tradition. And I'd like you to comment on how this is unique or different to the international banking sphere. And now that we're hearing that we need a new banking culture, how do you see that in relation to the savings banks?
So many questions.
I'll choose some of them.
Exactly. May I start by expressing my gratitude to Sanak for a very interesting and entertaining lecture. You really made banking sound exciting, as opposed to my childhood. My father worked for a private bank in Norway for 40 years, and I do remember always thinking about his job as tremendously boring. Now, as an adult, I think that banks should be boring. They should be as safe as the Bank of England, as the saying goes. And they should, first and foremost, enable the pursuit of happiness of people and facilitate full employment and tax revenues and what have you. Having said that, I have always been rather fascinated by the history of the savings banks. And may I just say that I think today Norway is one of the few countries in Europe that still has a vibrant and very important savings bank sector. in addition to Germany, for instance, as you know, and to a certain extent also Austria. We imported the concept of savings banks into Norway, first and foremost from the UK. And the first banks were established in the capital, and then it really spread out after 1822. The second and the third banks came in the other large cities of Trondheim and Bergen, and the number of savings banks in Norway peaked at about 600 in 1929. During the last 50 years or so, we have seen a lot of mergers, but still we have more than 100 savings banks in Norway, and I think that in total, all in all, the Norwegian savings banks have a market share of approximately 1/3. Although you didn't provide one unified definition of social banks, I think that in particular the savings banks' conduct in the last century, and I mean in the 1800s in particular, more or less confined to your very loose definition. They were basically set up, in particular in the cities and towns, in order to, facilitate financial services for people from all strands of life, walks of life. They were meant to give people incentives to save for rainy days, sickness and retirement and so forth. But they are, first and foremost, I think, defined by two types of trademarks, if I may say so. The first one being that all savings banks in Norway, they were self-owned up until the late 1980s, and like foundations, basically. And one implication of that is that the profits that these banks made, they were used in some parts, or to a certain extent, to finance public goods, a contribution to the common good. For instance, in Trondheim, where I come from, we have the second oldest savings bank in Norway, founded in 1823. This bank has contributed to, libraries, schools, museums, parks, and so forth. As a matter of fact, for many, many years, this bank also funded food for children in the schools, and so it played a very important social role in that city. But mind you, these were tasks or objectives that later on, in particular after the Second World War, has been taken over by the state and is now being financed by taxes and so forth. So I think that the scope, the opportunity for the savings banks to finance public goods has been decreased by the fact that we have seen such a large expansion of the state, in particular during the last 70 years or so. What's interesting now, I think, is that we are witnessing a second large transformation of the savings bank sector in Norway. Over the course of just the last 10 years or so, the number of savings bank foundations has increased from 2 to more than 30 now. I know that you also have a lot of savings bank foundations in Germany. I think it's more than 500. But the main difference between the German foundations and the Norwegian ones is that one main objective or role or function of the Norwegian foundations is to actually exercise bank ownership, which is a contrast, I think, to the German ones. But what's interesting, of course, going forward, is that it could very well be that in 20 years' time or 50 years' time, these foundations may consider owning banks not a very optimal strategy and may divert the funds and interests to other spheres in society, use that capital and the power that goes with it to basically solve problems that this capital initially was facilitated to solve. My point being that the problems that we faced as a country more than 200 years ago the absence of a financial sector is solved. But we have new problems facing us that it may not be up to the state or the market to properly deal with. Perhaps there is a scope for the capital that has been built up in the savings bank sector, which is now being transferred to these foundations, which somewhere down the road may find it optimal to start dealing with. So, in brief, that's my first reply. Thank you.
Thank you, very well. Then, Sanika, would at least some of these savings banks of the 18th century be considered possible members of the Institute for Social Banks? Or I guess my question is this modern push for social and ethical banking a result of the disappearance or at least reduced role of these local socially responsible banks that societies used to have?
Good question. I mean, that's something we just discuss. At the moment we only have the pioneers as our members, but as sustainable banking becomes more mainstream, we also discuss to onboard other members, as for example saving banks, cooperative banks that I wouldn't define at the moment as social banks. I mean, I think it would be a different case if you would ask the GABV, the Global Alliance for Banking on Values, if those banks could become a member, because they are really a network of the pioneers. We do at the ISB, we do education especially, and if someone is interested in education and wants to learn more about sustainable banking and finance, they should be welcome, of course. What I find very interesting, and that might be also a question to you, in Germany we experience, especially in the cooperative banking sector, some sort of a renewal or a refocus on values, maybe on their original values, and they, of course, they fit super good to our definition of social banking. So my question would be, how is that with the saving banks here? I mean, is there a similar development, a refocus?
May I?
Yeah, please.
Try to reply. May I be quite honest? I sometimes have the impression that a lot of debates concerning problems of finance tend to be slightly lost in translation, in the sense that we have this inclination, I think, to import problems and try and behave as if the problems that we are observing on Wall Street and so forth are particularly relevant to the Norwegian setting. I'm not entirely convinced that is the case. Most Norwegian banks are very, very stable, conservative, and safe. And I also think it's a matter of debate as to what banks should be in addition to banks. For me, I think most people tend to view banks as a service provider, a rather boring one at that. And I think for most people also today, banks is but an app on your iPhone. You may see some kind of reverse into a preference for bricks and mortar, but in general, I think that finance is something that is just supposed to be efficient, service-minded, stable, secure, and whereas objectives in terms of common good, popular policies and so forth should be left to the Parliament and to the government. So I'm rather uncertain as to how many objectives it should be rational to expect banks to fulfill, basically.
Very well. I think we're moving into the part of this evening where it makes sense to open for you guys to comment and ask questions. And I firstly saw that Ebba was burning.
I have a question, but I can wait. I can also give the microphone to
Please ask the question, and then if you have something, then raise your hand and I'll take note.
Then it's on. Thank you very much. My name is Ebba Boye. I'm the leader of Rethinking Economics Norway. Thank you for a very interesting presentation and conversation. And it's interesting, as you say. I mean, the question we're asking is: can we build a social banking system, or change? Can we change the banking system to make it more social? I guess is our main question. And the answer to that, I guess, in one thing is to make banks like Cultura and Ekobanken bigger, larger. That would, be one way of changing the banking sector. But also, I think Morten Søberg is here, so we can ask the question exactly as you just asked. Can we? What would it take to use the existing banks and start making them? They are to what extent are they social? And my question specifically comes to this notion about profit maximization. To what extent profit is a goal? And as you described it, these banks, they make profits, but then they give the profits away as gifts to an extent. Some of it. But then the question is also, then how is the profit made? How important is making the profit compared to other parts, other goals you could have? But I don't know if you can open up immediately for other questions.
Then we have the woman here.
And you can introduce yourself.
I think that your bank has a different way to act and approach. I think that they value localism instead of globalization, and web structured instead of centralization in this case, and humanity against people valued like as number. This is very important for me. Real economy is that, is the perception of people, and instead of against finance and statistics. What do you think about to make pressure in the European Union to ask European Union take it like ethics and values as parameters, sine qua non parameters, to value a society, the health of a society. This is, I think, it would be very important to press on that. So we reach more humanity in every money we do or every statistics. That's it.
Thank you. And then we'll take one more from the man second row here.
And if people have questions, they can also ask them in Norwegian, and we will help with the translation.
Yeah.
What changes to the existing financial system are social banks promoting? And another question: if all the banks in the world would become social banks, how would the world be, in your opinion, at that time?
If all banks became social banks.
I mean, definitely it would be a better place, I guess. Yeah.
What of the existing problems we solve? We have huge problems in the world, almost every area, every aspect of life. Would they all disappear?
I mean, yeah. I mean, I think as the financial system is the most powerful or most underlying system, I do believe if we change that, then there will be a lot of changes just in the life for a lot of people. And I think it's often I don't know what the word is, not the ear of a needle, but the eye of a needle. The eye of a needle. I mean, finance is the eye of a needle. If you change that, I think a lot of problems would be solved. But what would you say?
If I would be happy if we were not needed, but I think this kind of front runners and alternatives will be needed for many years to come. I think this is not about just changing a system, it's about changing a human being, because it is about working with our own ego and our own ego to make money, make profit, and we need to look into that, into ourselves as well. And that is more complicated than just changing a few rules or doing a sustainable bank or whatever. So it has really to do with the human being and working with the human being and change that. And that will take some time. And we are trying to do our best as financial providers, but as I said before, that's not at the front. It's what people are actually doing, which is the front. We are just supporting them with the money. To the question of pressure on EU, very good one. We would like to put more pressure on the European Union, but as was mentioned before, we are very tiny. We are smaller than Deutsche Bank, and then we can't afford that many lobbyists in the European Union. So what we do is to try and do public work. We try to take part in debates as much as we can through ISB or Global Alliance for Banking on Values to promote our values, but it is a long path ahead. Having said that, when you go to the EU and they put regulation into place, it will anyway just regulate the past. Regulation is always 5 to 10 years after a crisis has happened or something has happened. So it will definitely regulate what has happened 10 years ago. And we as banks needs to be in the front and be practitioners. So I think we are, as co-workers of these banks, more practitioners than lobbyists. And I think the lobbying work needs to be done by Rethinking Economics or other organizations that are more or less taking the debate and doing the think tank work.
Yeah, Fredrik, would you?
Yeah, I think we'll bring in the word which also Sanika pointed out as the most important one, I think, and that's transparency. At this point, because when you ask what should the walking be or what is the walking, we hear what the talking is, what is the walking, and that transparency is there to help us answer that question. So we have to ask you to go and see what kind of businesses we are cooperating with, who are our clients, and that's a very important point, that any business which granted the loan from Cultura Bank has to agree that we can tell the public that they have actually a loan in our bank, and we have to, the regulations in Norway, and I guess it's all over Europe like that, and certainly in the United States, I guess, that's actually illegal. So you have to make that deal with each and every one of your clients, but we do that. They sign that, and that's because we want to be able to say to the public, if you wonder about what is our walking, you can go and see, and then you will have answers like, when it comes to agriculture, it's we are financing organic farming in Norway, and we think that's because we think that's a better way of producing food for people, and it's certainly a very much better way to do it, so we keep the earth healthy. And so we finance organic farming, and that's just one example. But what we should do is to ask the politicians and why shouldn't transparency be for all? Why shouldn't that be the regulation? Why should it be secrets about who are the business clients of the banks? I think that's a good question. If we had that changed, that was a starting point and it would be very helpful for making more good changes. So transparency is definitely an important word here, in my opinion.
Good answers. And then to the first question, I think we're going to direct that to Morten. How social were they really?
The savings banks?
Yeah.
Well, when compared to the Central Bank of Norway, not that social after all. Having thought about this for just a few minutes now, it just struck me that perhaps the best example of a social bank in Norway is actually the central bank. It was founded, as you all know, in 1816. It was founded on blood, sweat and tears. The Parliament of Norway demanded that a special silver tax was to be collected in order to fund the equity of the new bank. Now, part of the story also is that the headquarters of the bank was located in Trondheim, not in the capital of Oslo, for 80 years. Unfortunately, it was moved. But over the last 20 years or so, 22 years, I think, the Central Bank of Norway has also, as you know, been the home of the oil fund, which has, over the course of just 20 years or so, become the largest sovereign wealth fund in the world. Now, my point is that the central bank is a very active investor of these funds in a very ethical manner. It has a very strong views on ethics, corporate governance, and it has actually become a voice worldwide in terms of exporting, as it were, good conduct in the financial sector. Having considered this, I think that it could be beneficial to expand our scope from small savings banks in Norway and so forth to also include the Central Bank of Norway in this discussion. And just one more point, just briefly. Talking about state banks, I think that one of the main challenges for the Norwegian economy going forward is that we are going to be faced with radical uncertainty. When we are forced to try to do something else apart from pumping oil and gas, I think that we are going to need an expanded role of state banks, in the sense that we need financial actors with a much larger loss absorbing capacity than the private banks are able to offer, because it's simply uncertain what we are going to do, and it's going to demand a lot more trial and experiments, basically, and I think that is going to imply an enlarged role for state actors within the financial sector. Thank you.
And on that note, we're gonna take one more round of questions. We can start with the gentleman right here, and then I would ask those of you who have already gotten my little nod to come to the front, because that way we can do it more quickly. So Andrea, Anna, yes. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Espen Ein. I'm from Payer. We're a fintech startup. Thanks for, it's been interesting to learn more about social banking. In many ways, it seems like a no-brainer. My question is, why aren't social banks bigger? What are your challenges that you have in terms of customer acquisition?
Could you quickly answer?
Of course. We have been around for almost 20 years, and for 18 of those years we weren't part of the Swedish national clearing system, so we were clearing through another bank, and that's what I talked about. The hurdle into the infrastructure is, in our country, in our context, huge, and now we're in it, but we still don't have all the services. And it's of course being small. Should we invest in all services or not, or focus on the ones that we have? But infrastructure has been the biggest struggle to us.
All right. Andrea?
I'm not sure whether I should ask a long question or a short question. Short. Can you comment on the differences between these different kinds of banks, savings banks and commercial banks and social banks, in relation to the aspect of money creation through credit?
That's probably
Briefly.
a short question, but this is supposed
Anna?
to be a long answer.
Should I go?
No. Anna?
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, my question. Okay, if you want me to stand
Yes,
up.
please. Introduce yourself.
My question regards the role played by the social banks in developing countries, because as I have understood it correctly, so it's more focused on the on financing more microfinance businesses, and what as I see it, cooperatives are a more sustainable way for poor people to produce and gain more scale, and in that way gain more have more income as a company. And I was wondering if the social bank address the problem that cooperatives, production cooperatives have in accessing finance, because that's one of the biggest problems of production cooperatives.
All right. We'll take an answer on the money creation and the financing of cooperatives. Sanika, you felt entitled.
Not the one on money creation. That is really that's a big topic. Yeah.
Morten?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's a very fascinating topic, money creation. Indeed. I saw that there was a debate in the House of Commons in England 3 years ago, actually, on money creation. The first debate on that topic since 1844. But the situation is the same in Norway as it is in the UK. All private banks create that kind of product, money. And it is also the case in Norway that coins and bills from the central bank comprise just 2 or 3% of the total amount of geld in the economy. So it doesn't really matter whether you are a savings bank or a private bank. We all produce money when we extend credit. So it's the same logic as in the UK and elsewhere. Thank you.
And then on the financing of cooperatives, Christopher.
There are, as was mentioned before, sustainable or social banks in most or on all continents and in most countries, and the regional variations are huge. And we are addressing the issues that are present in our countries, which is, Sweden and Norway are one of the richest countries of the world, but our sister or colleague banks are working in less developed countries, and they are as much as possible trying to address the issues that are present there. In some cases it is getting rid of poverty, of course, but in some cases, or in many cases, it is to finance cooperatives. And many of our fellow banks are solely working financing cooperatives in developing countries. To the issue of money creation, we are all part of the system, but I think it's important to be in the system to be able to do something with it, instead of being outside of it and talking about how bad it is. I think that is very important to us, to our role within the financial sector. What we try to do in terms of money creation is that we just finance the real economy, we finance real goods and services, and we use deposit money to do our loans. So our deposits are always larger than our loans. So we get money from devoted people that like what we do, and we lend it out to good projects. So that's our way of tackling this money creation issue.
All right. Then we're going to try to squeeze in the last very quick questions. I had the gentleman on the third row here, Louis, and then, yeah, the gentleman standing over here. Please. Yeah, would you like to? Gentleman sitting. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I've been associated with Cultura Bank and used to head it before Kjell Fredrik came in. And there is one big challenge in this industry and or being a social bank, because we are on exactly the same playing field as all the other banks. I think we have a business model. You were asking why aren't we growing really. I think we have kind of an outdated business model that is based on traditional banking. And I think for this banking sector really to take off would be maybe through fintech, you have opportunities, and maybe through another. We were talking at a seminar at BI also from Rethinking Economics about the shadow banking system, and sometime I felt I would like to be part of the shadow banking system, because that's the way. Then you can do something good, because we are really in a straitjacket. Kjell Fredrik mentioned it a little bit, being regulated up and down and left and right by exactly the same laws and regulations as the other banks. One last note on the savings banks, just very quick. I have ancestors too in the savings bank sector. I've been fascinating. It's not by chance that Cultura Bank is also a savings bank, because that was the banking, say, organization closest to our ideals. But I think the savings banks today, and even Cultura Bank, has had to succumb to equity issuing, equity certificates, and owners demand a return, and even more so from the other banks. They're competing for exactly the same capital as the commercial banks, as the investment banks, and that is a big challenge when you want to do something good. Thank you.
Thank you. Then we have Louis here. And yeah.
Thank you very much. So I had two questions. The first one would be, do you think the current macro and micro prudential regulation like Basel III are adapted to social banking? And if not, how should they be reformed? And the second question is, what kind of instrument do you use? Do you use only loans? Or do you use also, like, for instance, green bonds? Do you buy green bonds if you want to fund a project? And if so, how do you assess exactly if they are green or not? Because today we know there are not common framework to assess the greenness or the sustainability of financial assets. So my question is concretely, how do you do beyond good intentions? Thank you.
And then, yeah. And are you first, and then? Okay. Well. Always worth a try. Thank you.
Yes. My name is Terje Bjørsvik. I'm from the press. I'm a journalist. I just wonder, how can you really make a difference within the green shift? I mean, there's so many. This is so important. This type of banking, and there are so many things that have to be done in a short while, actually, to make a difference. You seem quite happy being small, and it's kind of it feels kind of strange, because I would think it would be important to reach new customers that aren't already saved, kind of. I mean, it's great to have a bank that supports ecological farming, but it doesn't really make a difference in the short or long run. Is there a strategy to grow faster and to get to reach a wider audience quicker. if you
Growth
get me.
strategy. Yeah? And then in the back.
Yes, my name is Paul Saugstad. I have been interested in banking for some years, and this is about the core banking system. There are initiatives like Positive Money in the UK, and I saw on the web page that one of the books you recommend is of Charles Eisenstein, which has his own view on how money should be managed, and with an influence from Silvio Gesell also. So I wonder, are you into research in those areas, or do you cooperate with initiatives like that in your field?
Okay. Last question first. Who feels?
Yeah. I mean,
we're gonna round off after this round, so if you want to comment, please make it quick and now. Okay, it's okay.
Jeg vokste opp i en sparebank, og når jeg var med å starte Cultura, og da var det for inspirasjon fra Sparebanken, som den gamle Sparebanken foregikk. Men det viktigste poenget med en sosial bank er at det er mulig for mennesker å være sosiale med den måten de bruker pengene sine med. Og det er jo veldig mange mennesker som sier Cultura Sparebank er en kjempegod idé, men det har jeg hørt om for 10 år siden, men enda ikke begynt å bruke den. Sånn at det krever, som Kristoffer sa, det krever på en måte en slags sånn lite menneskelig løft, en menneskelig utvikling å komme inn i dette. Men vi prøver å gå foran ved å på en måte vise at det er mulig å være bevisst hva pengene dine gjør når du ikke bruker dem selv. Og det er på en måte det jeg kaller å være sosial, og derfor er vi en sosial bank. Og bare helt kort, jeg er redaktør i bankens tidsskrift, det ligger noen her, og der skriver jo litt om hva banken gjør, sånn at det er mulig for menneskene å vite det. Altså en måte å være sosial på.
Thank you for that little promotion of Cultura. Last question first.
Yeah.
Sanika.
Concerning Charles Eisenstein and research. I mean, we do see ourselves more as a platform for research. So, yes, in the past we collaborated with, for example, Charles Eisenstein. He was one of our speakers, and he also he presented his view on money on our conference in Estonia in 2017. But we don't do a specific research on that topic at the moment. I'd love to do that.
And then to the social bank pensioners, growth strategy, and also these questions about green bonds and macroprudential regulations.
Yeah, well, the question, the answer when it comes to Cultura is we're using only loans and guarantees. We're not into bonds or anything so far. And I then have to remind you again, Cultura Bank is very, very small. It's DNB is 3,000 times as big as Cultura. So, and then I would like to ask the question: do we want to grow, and why don't? There is an impression that we are happy being small. We want to grow. Yes, definitely. You can always discuss how big should such a bank be, but we're in my opinion, we're too small today. So we want to grow. The main problem is that we're working in Norway, and the Norwegian people are too content with what they've got in many respects. They don't really want to change their agriculture being organic. because that's something which would be nice in Germany and Denmark, but here is everything okay, and so forth from topic to topic. And also with the banks, people are so content with what they've got. So that's a challenge to us. How to make people, more people understand that if we work together, we can make some really important changes, even if we are very small today. But yes, we want to grow.
Right. Yeah. Short comment. Yeah.
Yeah, short comment. I mean, concerning growth, I think it's always difficult to stay true to your core values if you grow. And I mean, I think, for example, GLS Bank, they are not big. I mean, they have around, I think, 600 co-workers, so they are not big, but they are one of the biggest social banks in Europe, with Triodos Bank. And I mean, it's a challenge to grow and to stay true to your values. That's why I would also suggest to collaborate more with other banks instead of grow.
Christopher, quickly.
We grew by 20% last year, and we still want to grow ahead. So that's not an issue to me. Growth is very important. Our best growth ever was in 2008, the crash year. We got many new clients because then many woke up and thought about where is my money and for what purpose is it being used, and then they switched. So we need some crisis in the financial system to wake people up and to move their money, because people tend to be fat and happy where they are. We do only loans and guarantees, just as Cultura. And then is the question: what are we doing with the money which is not placed in loans? We have it with central banks. We have it placed in certificates, state certificates, and state bonds, because we don't lend out all the money. Basel III adapted to social banks? No. That's a very simple answer. It is a far too big framework for social and sustainable banks.
Thank you. Morten?
Yeah, I actually wonder whether we in Norway are perhaps too reliant on the banking sector. I, in particular, don't really fancy banks growing too fast or becoming too large. I think it's safer for the economy and for the well-being of the people that banks are well regulated, tremendously stable, and don't really grow too fast. And I think also going forward that this reliance on a relatively large banking sector perhaps is not optimal. It may be the case that much more should be financed by equity instead of debt. So that's my kjetterske view on this matter. Thank you.
All right. On that note, I want to thank you all for coming. If you like the sort of events that we do in Rethinking Economics, please look at the flyer and consider supporting us financially. And then I would like you to give a hand to our wonderful panel and thank Sanika, Christopher, Kjelfred. Thanks, Sanika, Christopher, Kjell Fredrik, and Morten for coming. And I hope to see you all again.